Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way.
As wonderful as all of the speakers are, and all of the musicians and everything that we have at the conference, I think one of the things that makes these conferences so great is all of you. And so special thanks to everybody who is here and who makes this conference a wonderful place and a comforting and loving place. I came across a quote by Tim McGraw, which is funny because I'm not really a big country music fan, but he said, "We all take different paths in life, but no matter where we go, we take a little of each other everywhere." And that's how I feel about this Mormon Stories community. Today we're going to start this session with a musical number by Tia and Keith Callister. And this is an original work of music that they have put together for us. And then we are so honored and thrilled to have Claudia Bushman. And I'll go ahead and introduce Claudia now, and then she can just come up after the musical number. Claudia Bushman is one of Mormonism's most prominent intellectuals and feminists, an American historian, writer, teacher, editor, activist, mother of 6, and thinker. She holds degrees from Wellesley, Brigham Young University, and Boston University. As I was learning a little bit about Claudia, I came across a few things that I thought were super interesting. She was the Mother of the Year for the state of New York in the year 2000, and she produced the LDL Church's cultural celebration at Radio City Music Hall in connection with the New York Temple dedication. And I know from listening to Claudia on a few podcasts that that's something that's very important to her, and I think she'd like to see more of again, some of these cultural celebrations in connection with Mormonism. Claudia is also an author of several books, most recently Contemporary Mormonism, Latter-day Saints in Modern America. And she and her husband just finished teaching a course at Columbia, and they are spending the summer in Provo, and we're just so grateful to have her here. So Tia and Keith, and then Claudia.
This is a song I wrote when I was a young, naive missionary lad in northern Brazil. It means different things now than it did then.
Living in space, coincidence, a living trap hung in lace. Crazy when I thought I knew the meaning of it all. Crazy when I sought to please and the ignorance took its toll. Not waiting for your life, heartbreaking bide my time. Keep trying to hold back the fight, keep crying.
There wasn't an answer, I knew that nothing was for sure. I ate back the feeling, I didn't know what I was feeling. One more drop into electric night, one more crash through dissonance and its plight.
Not waiting for this life, heartbreaking bide my time. Keep trying to hold back the fire, keep crying. tripled emotion strapped to my fate. Triple commotion, sudden coincidence create.
I drop 100 yards through the ground, been trying to hide myself from the unborn sound.
Not waiting for this life, heartbreaking bide my time. Keep trying to hold back the fight, keep dying.
I'm a big believer in telling our stories. One experience I had long ago was a visit to a branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the Bronx, one of the city of New York's tougher boroughs, where my son, who was then a medical student, was the branch president. It was a pitiful branch in many ways. Inefficient, full of very strange people from strange lands, and strange Americans who had not managed to get anything together in their whole lives. The Relief Society had a tradition on their 5th Sunday that the women would tell their stories. They had a little prop, a tin child's globe. And they would turn it around and point out where they came from. I'm from Madagascar, right here. I'm from Peru, not far from Machu Picchu. I'm from a little island between these two other little islands, right there in the blue sea. Then the sister would tell her story about how her mother was washing clothes in the stream and these two young men came along and told her about people in other lands, Jesus Christ and Joseph Smith, and how the family changed some of their traditions, began to go to the little chapel where they met with the saints, and how talking to the elders and the members, they had thought how it would be possible for her, the daughter, to go to the United States and begin a new life. And after a while, it didn't matter anymore that the woman looked odd, that she was wearing a very strange outfit, that her English was awkward. She was a sister, a dear sister. It was a marvelous experience for everyone. We've done that sort of thing in other wards where we've lived and published little books of remembrances. My husband is currently the high priest group leader in one of the Manhattan wards, and telling their stories is the major source of lesson material. All that has certainly been involved in my current big project, the Claremont Oral History Program. This summer we are trying to beat into shape the essays that the students have written to make a book, using the oral histories that we have in hand as source material. Encouraging women who are certainly the silent majority of Mormondom to get their stories down is an important work, and one that I invite you all to join in. And if people are interested, I'll make my little manual available to you. Maybe Mormon Stories had put it online or something. And anyone who wants to tell her own story, this is a woman's project, or to interview someone else, can turn out a transcription that we will be glad to add to our collection at Claremont, which is now numbering over 160 extensive interviews with women of all ages and kinds. But sharing our stories, as we all know here, turns us into communities. Once in graduate school, I was talking to a friend. She said she was sad. She felt lonely and alone in the universe. I told her that I sometimes felt that way, but she would have none of that. She completely dismissed me. She said that I couldn't possibly understand because I had the Mormons. Of course, she was right. I do have the Mormons. I've always had the Mormons, and I hope I will always have the Mormons. I will never feel as abandoned as she did because I always do have the Mormons. I can find friends anywhere. I already have friends everywhere. I have a community to belong to in any place I go. I can visit with the elders on the street. I can find people who are recognizably Mormon, who know people I know, even if I don't know them to begin with. I can start a conversation and have instant intimacy in no time. Last year we lived in 3 cities, in 3 wards. We have good friends in all of them. We have a built-in group of friends if we choose to take them up. But we don't have to interact with all those people all the time. But we can if we want to. One young woman that I know, unmarried at 40 plus, moved from a ward full of young professionals in a big city where she was the center of activities and ideas for activities. When she enrolled in graduate school, she found herself in a very staid, very conservative, very much married ward. That ward apparently did not know what to do with her and didn't try very hard. People completely ignored her. She was invisible. People did not greet her or speak to her or ask about her background or give her an assignment. She was completely out of it. After some weeks of being completely invisible, she devised a proactive strategy. She told the primary president that she loved to teach and was always available to substitute for a class. She announced in Relief Society that she would be going to the temple regularly and would drive a car full of people. She vowed that when she left that ward, that people would miss her. She felt that she had arrived in the ward when someone called to ask her a question, what time some event was. She had been recognized as an insider. It was success. When she did leave that ward, which she has certainly done, people regretted her going. She had made a place for herself in a community where she did not originally belong. I know that a lot of people feel left out in their wards. They hold views unpopular with others in congregations. They do not feel that they are welcome to voice them. In fact, they feel censured when they speak up. I've had experiences like that myself, and I was certainly stunned. People feel excluded from cliques and power groups. They feel that some wonderful ward life is going on without them and that they have been purposely left out. Stressed ward communities bring pain as well as comfort. There are power lines, inexperienced leaders, relationships so close that they can scarify. I want to read you a Mormon story from 100 years ago. You will see some details that date it, but you will also see a situation that could happen today. As we have the power to love and include each other, we also have the power to injure each other. It is interesting to note, however, that such stories come to a resolution in the end. As they say, everything will work out at the end. If it doesn't work out, it's not the end. And here's the story. As I was a stake board member then with the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association, as it used to be called, later the Mutual Improvement Association, now the YW, the Young Women, I had to meet with the local board and relay instructions to them. Some way, somehow, a bad spirit crept in, and they said I was usurping their authority. I didn't know that they felt that way, but they complained to our bishop, and he, in an effort to straighten things out, called us all to a meeting. I didn't know what I was in for, so I went all unaware of my trouble. The bishop called on them to state their case, and one by one they told him that I was trying to run their organization. I was so overcome. I began to cry, and all I could say was, it was a mistake. I had no such idea, only passing on word from our president. My brother-in-law was one of the bishopric, but he felt so bad for me he couldn't say a word. I felt very bad about that. The bishop decided there was nothing much to it and told us all to shake hands and forget it. I, in my indignation and grief, got up to walk out, but he called me back and made me stand. Each one came up and took my hand and said they were sorry, but I would not speak. Just then, one woman spoke in tongues, powerfully, and you probably know that this is glossolalia, sort of unrecognizable syllables that are treated as a foreign language, that someone translates in an interpretation. The interpretation was that they were to ask my forgiveness, and I was to really forgive them or the Lord would be displeased with me. But in my anger, I wouldn't do it, and as soon as possible, walked out. And the efforts that the group made to be friends, I rebuffed and would have none of them. In the group were some of my best friends. For several months, I would not speak to any of them, and I suffered deeply. I hated to be not on friendly terms, but couldn't forgive the humiliation that they had put me to. Finally, in distress, I went to the stake president to seek his counsel and tell him the story. And this is what he said. I can see how you feel. It was an unpardonable thing to do. The bishop should have known that a stake officer could only be handled by stake authorities. It was a blunder. But now all of those sisters are very sorry. They want your friendship, and you are withholding it. Now, if you are to progress and go forward in the church, you must forgive everyone, and that means forget everything, and give them the hand of friendship. If you don't do this, your usefulness will be ended. You will no longer be called on to work in the church. If you forgive them truly, forget your anger, and really take the hand of all of them with love in your heart, you will be happy again. They will love you, and the day will come when you will be given leadership in the mutual. They will take instructions from you and love you for being their head. Now, what are you going to do? I said, President, I will do all you say and put out of my heart the bitterness in it. He blessed me and said the Lord had a work for me to do if I would prepare and be worthy. I left his presence refreshed and blessed, with all the bitterness and anger cleansed out of my heart. I went home happy and light-hearted and lost no time in meeting that group in the right spirit. And they were very happy to give me the true friendship necessary, and never again was there any trouble between us. Now, what do we make of that? People working together have tensions. They get cross and speak out. Others react. Everyone already understands what should happen, and the speaking in tongues points the way. A hierarchical structure is in place that allows for peacemaking. Rewards are offered for good behavior. Peace is restored. It's a classic case of civility repairing chaos. People get upset by other things. They hear about shocking and startling things that happened in LDS church history, insensitive pronouncements from leaders in the past. They wonder why the church has suppressed this damaging information. How can a church where such things have happened or have been said to be the true church? At such times, they don't even want to be part of a ward community. For the 19th century life of the church, from its organization in 1830 until the turn of the century when many things changed and Utah became a state, the church pretty much told its own story for its own benefit. People outside of the vast foreign enclave of Deseret criticized, attacked, and dismissed the Mormons as depraved religious fanatics. When Mormons told their own story to themselves, they told it as the heroic and miraculous tale of virtuous believers cast out from the lands of their fathers. Both stories still stand, even as people in both camps sort out the details. My husband, Richard Bushman, sitting down here, who has spent a lot of time in the annals of church history, encourages people to follow up on the shocking details of church history. He says that the way to approach such things is to go right into the center of them. When shocking details are exposed to clear light, they often lose their punch. Some years ago, he was working on a book entitled Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism. At that time, references to the founding Mormon prophet Joseph Smith as a money digger were considered slurs on his character. But as Richard read the 19th century sources, he thought that it was pretty clear that Smith, his family, and his friends were all involved in treasure seeking. He also found out that this was common behavior for poor, uneducated farmers at the period. Pirates had supposedly buried treasure all over. Water witching, the discovery of underground water, was well accepted. Joseph Smith had found a stone that helped him to locate treasure, although I don't know of any spectacular finds, till he brought home the gold plates. But this folk magic was common among the folk people of 19th century America. So Richard wrote about that folk magic in his book. Church members now accept the idea that Joseph Smith was a money digger. Another such damaging detail is that Joseph Smith married a 14-year-old girl, Helen Moore Kimball. Surely, some say, this fact proves that he was a pervert, a lecher, an unprincipled person who used his hold on his members to lure young girls into his evil designs and infamous ways. It certainly looks bad for Brother Joseph, and that fact alone has shaken the faith of many people in the church. Surely this is a case where we should look farther than the fact of the marriage. Richard says that if he were rewriting Rough Stone Rolling, he would make more of the incident, seeing as it bothers so many people. The marriage took place in May of 1843, when Helen was 2 or 3 months shy of her 15th birthday. First, we should say that marriages at that age were not unusual in the 19th century, at 15, 14, and even younger. We should also say that if the LDS leader was looking for extramarital intercourse, that there are many easier ways to find it than setting up a program where men married additional wives under the pretense of divine sanction. In this case, we know that Heber C. Kimball, one of Smith's most devoted followers, made the approach. He asked Helen to become Joseph's wife, and he had, according to Helen, previously offered her to Joseph to be sealed to him as his wife for dynastic purposes, to link the houses of Heber and Joseph through eternity. As Helen later wrote, having a great desire to be connected with the prophet Joseph, he offered me to him. This I afterwards learned from the prophet's own mouth. Helen herself opposed the marriage, as did her mother, Valete, but Helen and Joseph were married. The marriage was short, as Smith died the next year, and Helen was a widow at 15. Helen wrote more about her resentment at curtailed social activities than about the secret marriage. She went on to other places and other relationships. Do these sketchy things change the way we think of the marriage? They do for me. In the church, we not only interpret the stories, facts, and teachings of the church, we are in a position to make our own. We have access to deity through our prayers and personal revelations, and we can make choices in interpreting the teachings that come to us. Here's a story from the Claremont Oral History Collection, a cross-cultural experience, as rich a story of doctrinal creation as I know. This is from a woman who grew up in the Fiji Islands. When I was a child and we lived in the village, we had no refrigeration. My granddad, when he had some money, he'd get bread. He'd buy a loaf of bread, and because we had no way of storing it in a refrigerator, we would sit on the floor and get a piece of cloth. So we had the tablecloth on the floor. So after we ate some, we would put the bread in, fold it up, and put it in a woven basket of pandanus leaves. On the ends of the basket would be a string, and we would hook it up to the beam of the house, so it was off the floor and away from the ants. That is, if we had folded the bread up quick enough before the ants got into it. Because sometimes he would say to us, "Hurry up," and my cousin and I would say, yeah, we'll put it away. But then we would run around and play, and the bread still was there. And then we would remember we needed to put the bread away. So we would wrap it up and hang it. But we had forgotten that the ants would already have gotten in. The next morning, Granddad would tell us to get the bread down. And the bread comes down, and we'd all sit around, and the kettle boiled, and the tea is poured into the cups, and we would proceed to cut the bread. And you cut the bread, and the ants are just falling out of the bread. So I would get my piece of bread, and "Oh no," I would say, and I would bang it on the floor, and the ants would come out. I don't know how my cousin and Granddad ate their bread, but I am sitting there hitting the bread on the ground, and so as I am hitting it, more ants come out. So then they would climb up on my hands and my legs, and I would start swiping them off and jumping around. And Granddad would say, "Just dip it in your tea." And I would say, "But it's still ants. It's going to kill me." And Granddad would say, No, just dip it in your tea. It will kill the ants, and it will be all right for you. It is good for you. Trust me, see." And he would dip his bread into the tea and eat it and say, "See, I am still alive." So I thought that he must be right. So I would dip my bread into the tea and I would eat it, but I would still want to pick the ants out. Then my Granddad would say, "You could not spend all of your days, or you could spend all of your days, but you could never get all the ants out. There is just so much in there. And when you pick at the bread, every piece of ant you get out, you get a piece of bread out too. So by the end of the day, you're going to have no bread to eat because every piece of bread that you're pulling out has a piece of ant on it. Then you will be hungry because there's no bread to eat, and you will be late for school." And he would do that every morning. The routine of me not eating the bread, then I finally realized that I'd better dip it in the tea and eat it. It was some years later, during a sacrament meeting, that it finally dawned on me what that was really about. He taught me that the ants are good for you. And I figured what Heavenly Father was trying to tell me is that in our lives, well, my husband could be that piece of bread. And I am looking at every little thing that is wrong with him. And I am picking it out and picking it out. And at the end of the day, there's nothing left of my husband to love because I have picked out all the imperfections in him. He drops his socks, his undies on the floor, that he doesn't wash the dishes. Every little thing I could think wrong about him would be like me picking the ants out of the bread. At the end of the day, there's nothing left of my husband to love anymore because it is all eaten up by my picking at it, trying to destroy the little things. But when Granddad said to drink it, to dunk it in the tea because it's good for you, well, I take everything that I felt is wrong and that I feel bad about, and I take it to the Savior, and He immerses it in His blood and in His atonement. Then everything would be all right. I would just take it all to Him and let it go and just immerse it in His blood and His atonement. Then it will be all right. And when Granddad said that the bread with the ants would be good for you, it really is good for me. It is better for me to let go and not pick at every little thing about someone else or even about myself. I can pick out things I don't like about my face or putting on weight, but if this is all that I concentrate on, and I don't concentrate on what it is all about, the big picture, then I am losing out on life and the lesson of life. Then my days are wasted. Like my Granddad said that I was picking on so many ants that I could miss out on school. We could miss out on our lives if we were picking on things. I'm here to learn things, and that is all I am concentrating on. I am missing out if I am picking on all the little things. That lesson just hit me out of the blue, and I have not forgotten it since because it taught me a powerful lesson about what the atonement really means. For the atonement to be effective, it has to apply to me first, especially for others, especially for my own husband. If I want the atonement to work in him, then I need for it to work in me first. It is forgiveness. Heavenly Father can't really forgive me if I can't forgive myself or forgive the other person, because then greater sin is upon me if I don't forgive. And I have felt the same about looking at others and how to not pick on the ants and of others or of myself, because when I do, I am taking away something that is important and good for me to know. So it is that in the stories of others we find answers to our own problems. I hope this lesson has come through to you, and that when you find your bread is full of ants, you will remember to dunk it in your tea. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the greater community of Mormons, where we speak in stories, where we try to accept and comfort, where we try to reconcile disagreements and relieve tensions, where we are all in this great tradition together. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Claudia, thank you so much. It's so great to be able to learn from your experience and your wisdom. We really appreciate it. Next, we have two speakers from our Salt Lake community, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them both now. And first, we have Michael Fife, who is originally from Seattle, Washington. He holds degrees from Brigham Young University and Northwestern. He says he met his wife, Chelsea, at a romantic encounter in the Liberty Square Apartments parking lot in Provo. He wouldn't give me any more details. The Fifes have lived in California, Buenos Aires, Chicago, and they now reside in North Salt Lake, and they have 4 kids, ages 13 down to 6. And after Mike, we will be pleased to hear from Stephanie Lauritzen. She's from Salt Lake City, and Stephanie has degrees from the University of Utah and Westminster, and she is a high school English teacher. Stephanie married, and she just had a little baby girl that I've seen her carrying around. She's adorable. Stephanie she also has a popular blog called Mormon Child Bride. So Mike, and then Stephanie.
Thank you. You know, I was told this is going to be a TED-style talk, so I had visions of walking around with a fancy multimedia presentation, and I have put together at least 6 PowerPoint slides that I spent, I kid you not, at least 5 minutes on, so I hope you guys enjoy it. But this is designed to be kind of a story regarding, you know, my and my wife's story, navigating both faith and then crisis and then a middle way. And I hope that some of you will take away some key lessons, because many of you in this room are navigating either crisis, maybe a spouse is navigating crisis, and everybody's seeking reconciliation, so I hope this is useful for you. So it was about a year ago that I first came to Mormon Stories. We were meeting at, it was the June conference, and I had just run the Utah Valley Marathon that morning. And I was exhausted and tired and dehydrated. We came, and at the time I was this innocent, orthodox, a self-proclaimed unorthodox Mormon, but nevertheless very faithful. And I'll get into my story in a minute. But I remember thinking, coming to Mormon Stories, thinking, who are these people? These people are crazy. What was my wife doing? And I came, and I liked it. And I got to know many of you. I got to host several of you at my house a number of times. And over the course of this year, I've learned for myself that you guys are freaking crazy. This is crazy stuff we're doing right now. So, but it's been a great pleasure to get to know you. I've interacted with many of you online, and I certainly know that many of the labels I had didn't apply, but rather we're all seeking reconciliation in our own way, in a way that's meaningful and authentic for all of us. So let me tell you about myself. I am indeed a Mormon, and like most of you, I was born of goodly parents. My father oozes righteousness, right? He is no ounce of judgment in him, and my mother is purely a saint. You know, they've been everything from senior missionaries to temple sealers to you name it. And I was, you know, as Terry mentioned, I was raised in Seattle. I was actually born in Bountiful, Utah, where I lived an entirety of 2 years, and then moved to Renton, Washington, when it was about 2 years after my father finished his medical residency. And I grew up in what was a fairly Orthodox household, but one that was also mildly unorthodox. We did everything that you guys did. We went to church every Sunday. We had family home evening religiously and heard all the pioneer and Mormon stories every single Monday night without missing a beat. But then sometimes, you know, my parents would do some mildly uncorrelated things, like we might go out to a dinner on a Sunday for some odd reason, or, you know, when we were kids, we would never drink Coca-Cola, or heaven forbid, Mountain Dew. Remember how in the 70s, Mountain Dew had that intoxicated hillbilly as its logo? And one thing Mormons are not are intoxicated hillbillies, right? We're bearded polygamists, right? I mean, that's what we are. But after a while, by the time I got to junior high, Diet Coke, Tab, for those of you that enjoy, Tab would show up in the house. What is this Tab? It must have caffeine. Maybe caffeine's not bad. So I had at least a fairly balanced upbringing. And I knew that, we went to church every Sunday, as I mentioned. I was a 4-year graduate of seminary. But my grandparents, who lived down the street, with whom I loved to go over and visit them and sleep over, because I'd get to watch Dukes of Hazzards and The Love Boat. You guys all watched The Love Boat. I always watched The Love Boat, right? I'm out of the closet. I watched The Love Boat. And I loved it, but you know what? At their house, on their counter, were things like Taster's Choice or General Foods International coffees, which sounded so exotic, but I remember thinking as a little boy, oh, well, maybe coffee's not that, maybe they can do it. Maybe it's not that evil, whatever. Can I have a hamburger? Let's go play cards. And my grandparents, they taught me a 5-card draw. So I grew up in a fairly, kind of outside the bounds of what 1970 Mormonism was all about, right? Which was Joseph Fielding Smith, Bruce R. McConkie style. And but my mother was, my father as well, very active. My father served on high councils, was in the bishopric. My mother was always either primary president, young women's president, Relief Society president many times. And so we grew up, very much in the church. And I remember on Sundays, back in the day, we used to go to Sunday school in the morning and then sacrament meeting at night, which we got to go back to that. But we used to do that. But during the day, during the breaks, we would study scriptures. We were pretty hardcore about that. I remember reading, and Chelsea, you could advance the slide, we would read the illustrated stories of the Book of Mormon. Does anybody have that old set with the audio cassettes? So I would listen to those all day, and they had these beautiful illustrated pictures of like Lehi's dream and of Nephi getting, taken away to the mountaintop where the angel would say, "Look," or "Behold." And why don't you go ahead and advance it one more? And I remember thinking, man, I am Lehi. I had 5 brothers. We are 5 brothers, excuse me. So I had 2 older and 2 younger. And my 2 older were totally Laman and Lemuel, right? They dabbled in drugs. In all seriousness, they dabbled in alcohol and drugs, had a lot of bad friends. And I remember thinking, man, I am Nephi. I got two wicked older brothers. I got 2 younger brothers that just want to do what's right. I've got a visionary father, and I've got my mother murmurs. It was perfect. And I remember thinking that, that my father, on one hand, he was a man of many short-lived passions. He would go on for years trying to learn. He'd go on a Greek kick, right? He would start learning Greek, and I would walk in the room. He'd have cassette tape on. He'd be saying Greek words out loud, listening to the audio, which I couldn't hear. So he'd be like, and then he'd go on to Hebrew, right? It was like Indiana Jones, I'd rock in the room. He'd say, "Count to 10 in Hebrew." So he was but then he'd switch habits and start, reading books by like Tom Brown, the tracker. He was going to be a big outdoor survivalist guy, and he would track animals, and he'd just be all into it, and then he would go on to something else. So very much a visionary man. My mother was very much a murmurer. She nagged. Let's just say it like it was. She was a nagger. She nags my father to this day incessantly over the most minute details, over which my father just says, "Yes, dear, that's okay. Yes, I love you." So But they were very, very good people. I think my mother's nagging says more about where I get my OCD from than it says about anything else. But I remember thinking, I'm Nephi. I mean, advance the slide one more time. I mean, Nephi beheaded people. That was cool stuff, right? So I was very much into, like, I'm a Mormon. This is who I am. And I grew up knowing as well that I was of purebred pioneer stock. I mean, I was a great, and I still am, a great-great-great-grandson of Brigham Young himself through Lucy Bigelow, whom I'm convinced was his favorite wife. Because the 42nd wife's typically the favorite, right? And the 43rd is like, yeah. But very much purebred stock. I was a grandson as well of John D.T. McAllister, the very man for whom in the the St. George Temple, he baptized Wilford Woodruff on behalf of the founding fathers. And I was related to Thomas Durbin, Carolyn Mortensen, members of the Willie and Martin Handcart companies. You know, the very ones who were stranded at the Sweetwater, about whom some of the most dramatic stories in Mormonism is told. So I remember growing up and being very aware of this, being very intimate with my Mormon heritage, and this was clearly who I was. I loved my spot in Mormonism in terms of who I was and my identity. I served a mission in Argentina, Trelew, after graduating from high school in 1990, just to date myself there. And I read the scriptures constantly. Among other works, I had the missionary set. So I served a mission in Argentina. I want you to advance it one more time for me. And read all the standard works you're issued. I read Jesus the Christ, and I've gone back to reread it many times. I've read The Great Apostasy and all those missionary books that many of you probably have still kicking around in your room and in your house. When you're on a mission, that's the time of life when doctrine and gospel merges, seamlessly with urban legend. On mission, you talk about the Garden of Eden, you talk about Missouri, you talk about the atonement and salvation, and you also talk about, that dry cleaner that burned to the ground because the guy displayed the Mormons' missionaries' garments and mocked them, right? That happened in every mission in South America. The thing burned down. It's a true story. So it was a beautiful time, back in a time when Mormonism and the church was big and it was wondrous and it was a mystery. I mean, I had this sense of manifest destiny, right? That we were a chosen people indeed. And but I also knew from prayer and from faith and from study that life is a journey of learning. Right? We're all here to learn and to figure out how to interact with God. At the end of the day, it's you and it's God. It is your maker. And that's one of life's big journeys, right, is to figure that out. How do you do that? How does it work? And I knew through study and through experience as well that there are shades of gray in life. Nothing is ever absolute per se. Our own church teaches that if we look hard enough. And, by the end of my mission, I had certainly developed my own interpretation of scriptures, as we all do and as we frankly all should. And I felt very comfortable with my interpretations of the plan of salvation and even how to reconcile trickier issues such as the role of prophets and how the atonement works. And for me, obviously the church defined my worldview. It is my spiritual language. It remains my people. And as I mentioned, you had this beautiful sense, that maybe some of us here have lost, that sense of manifest destiny, that, this is something special. So as Terry mentioned, I went to BYU and I met my lovely wife, Chelsea, there at that magical encounter. And I'll spare you the details because I'm sure Chelsea will tell you her version. But what I loved about my wife was that she was highly unorthodox, right? So in the early 90s, I'm at BYU in the summertime. I'm dating all the BYU girls. And of course, they're all sticky sweet, really cheesy, and they have the depth of like a Twilight novel. And now, granted, BYU has a lot of really deep, intelligent women, but I didn't know any of them, right? I didn't know any of them. So that summer, I was really looking for something authentic. So this was the summer of 1994 in August when I met my wife in that encounter, and she invited me up to her apartment, and first thing she wants to do is show me your crystals and talk to me about the energy they have. And I was like, show me your crystals, sweet. And and it was great. I loved the fact that she was just very, very different. And she'd wear, these big flowy skirts and kind of had a little bit of shoulder showing. So I was like, Racy, who is this girl? And obviously that was the girl for me. So we started to work together at the local spa fitness gym, for those of you who know Provo. Later worked at Powerhouse Gym on 9th East. It's now a Gold's Gym. Worked there for years, and eventually got married in the Oakland Temple and graduated and moved away from Provo in 1997, in the spring of 97. And from there we went to Folsom, California, and to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I worked for Honeywell at the time. And then later moved to Chicago and lived there for about 10 years until moving here in 2007. And through it all, we were faithfully going to the church. We had friends outside in the mission field, with whom we had this incredible bond because we had these shared experiences and can kind of revel in our common uniqueness, that we were members of the church. We forged a bond based on that collective uniqueness. And we would, we served in young women's presidencies and young men's presidencies and served in bishoprics and elders quorum presidencies and Sunday school. And we were very much into it. And being in Illinois at the time, we visited all the sites. So we went to all the sites, and we went to go visit Hill Cumorah. We saw the Hill Cumorah pageant. We went to we went to Nauvoo, saw the City of Joseph pageant, explored our roots there. We went to Independence, Missouri. We went to Atonement, where you literally can feel the sacredness of the soil in Atonement. So we reveled in this. We studied church history. We were into it, and obviously we still are. But at that stage of life, clearly the church was still big and wondrous, and maybe it is for some of you, and maybe it isn't for some of you. Maybe some of you were here because one thinks it is, one thinks it isn't. But of course, life isn't always entirely perfect and tidy. As with life, not everything fits perfectly into a given narrative. For one, like for many of you, and I know certainly for my wife, sometimes portions of the church just doesn't exactly fit just right. I mean, for example, we have this idea that there's a Father in heaven who will connect with you through His Spirit through this kind of proverbial burning in the bosom. But what happens if you never feel the burn like the way you're supposed to, like the way it's advertised, the way we talk about it incessantly? We also have this Heavenly Mother, right, who is conspicuously silent and perhaps even non-existent. And we have this culture and this process where the only way you know that you're in good standing is you go into for an interview, and a local guy in the neighborhood, who's always a man, will tell you are. And there's a checklist there. There's a proverbial checklist. Just would you go ahead and advance the slide one? So we're taught, of course, that, over and over, that if you do this and that right, if you go through your checklist, good things will happen. Blessings will come, for yourself, and the narrative will follow as prescribed. But of course, we know it doesn't always work out. Sometimes it's tough to get that burning in the bosom, to kind of feel it just the way people are saying that they're feeling it in sacrament meeting. And sometimes, what do you do if there's not that confirming witness that everybody talks about so relentlessly? For me, at least at this point in time when we moved to Utah, I was content with my personal interpretations. I felt, that one's relationship with God wouldn't necessarily always follow the pattern we advertised. And I believe that the Lord doth grant unto all nations of their own tongue His word and His testimony. And therefore, your way of finding truth within Mormonism, according to your tongue and your manner of experiencing the divine, was just as good as the textbook version of gaining a personal, undeniable witness of the truth through that famed burning in the bosom. That was always my perspective. But obviously for my wife on the other side of the fence, getting to a certain age, after a while, it's just not okay anymore to not know the way you're supposed to know, because everybody deserves to know for themselves. That's what we teach, that's what we instill in our youth, and that's what we advertise. So through separate impulses, but together, we began to attend the temple weekly, every week, for nearly a year, religiously. And I remember often driving or running through Bountiful, Utah, along Bountiful Boulevard, and seeing that temple and thinking, and feel compelled to go. And we went, and a funny thing happened at the temple. We certainly connected with the divine. And for me, it was deep and it was insightful. But for my wife, it was very different than the narrative advertises, which was shocking. Insightful, good, yes. The ritual and the meditation provided therein certainly is very good. But it was very different. And so we both connected in a meaningful way, but it was kind of resulting in different conclusions. For example, speaking for my wife, she certainly concluded that, revelation, inspiration does come through its nuance. It comes through your personal experience. It's not necessarily verbatim, and it can be written down. You can hand it to somebody else and call it revelation. It doesn't usually work like that for the lay member. And so that was very, very different. We certainly learned there are exceptions to these hard rules that we tend to preach. And additionally, her diligent work and family history, forced her to confront things in all of our past that were squarely in her past. Things such as the idea of mothers of Israel, those women that were brought up to do many things, among which was to prepare other young women to accept and live the principle of plural marriage. Or family members who crossed the plains but then turned back and decided not to go to Salt Lake. Those are the people sometimes vilified in church history, but rather these were still just good people doing what they felt was best for their families. So from there, many of you know where that peak into the uncorrelated world, where that goes. And I won't bore you with all the sordid details of agonizing self-discovery, but let it suffice to say that total chaos ensued, right? Full plunge into what we would call here lovingly a faith crisis. And let's go ahead and advance it one. So one more. And then at a quiet moment, of course, in Zion National Park, where we are hiking, my wife told me her feelings for kind of where she was in this proverbial journey that we're all on. She told me that the church to her wasn't really what it claimed to be, in her opinion, and she wanted to redefine her and, by extension, our interaction with it. So many of you know what that feels like. It feels like something dies. It's not you or your wife or your significant other, but something dies. That vision, that shared dream you have of this, following this narrative all the way to the celestial kingdom. This idea that of course we've been sharing and teaching and reciting to ourselves for years. And of course, I certainly at the time couldn't believe what I was hearing and would go on to hear in the weeks that followed. Things like, it's not true. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean the prophets, aren't always the best mediator between people and God? What do you mean by that? Of course they're not. Of course they're not that. I know that. I'm enlightened. We talk about, what do you mean truth goes to people in different ways? What do you mean by that? Of course that's the case. And then she's like, I'm like, kinderhook plates? What are you leading with that for? What are we talking about the kinderhook plates for? Then Book of Abraham, this, and then what the hell is polyandry? Where are we going with this? So this is full crisis, right? And many of you here have experienced that full crisis, trying to reconcile a nuanced, kind of a colored history with what has always been, a fairly clean and, as we tend to call here, a sanitized version. So we would go to church and sit in the pews and feel like a freight train had just hit us. I would watch the movie Inception. I appreciated Andrew's reference. I was like, oh, you mentioned Inception. But I would sit there and watch the movie Inception and think, this has got to be a dream within a dream, right? This is like, we built a dream world, and here comes the kick to wake us up, and, it's like plunging us into uncorrelated Mormonism. And I had read a lot of things over the years, criticisms, church history, and I had gone deep into issues such as Book of Mormon, anachronisms, and archaeology, and had gotten into, certainly been exposed to different things church leaders had said in times past that today we would find very surprising. And I would study, ancient Christian ideas that seemed to foreshadow things like theosis, so I felt like I was fairly exposed to most. So at that point in time, of course, I'm thinking like many of you maybe, it's like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. What is happening here? This is a worldview imploding. So this was not the storybook narrative of a happily married in the temple, card-carrying couple in the church. But key number one is that I knew that I had to have an open mind. You have to have an open mind. And that's key number one. You certainly cannot trade a family and commitment for institution. After all, my grandparents and other aunts and uncles who were not of our faith, were very good people, and I knew them well and loved them. And I trusted that you could study it out in your mind and find truth no matter where it lied. That we could seek ye out of the best books, words of wisdom. And I trusted, like Gordon B. Hinckley himself, would say that, hey, our history is an open book. So, and I'd studied the gospel in depth, to where I too would know that not all is always well in Zion, right? I read Jesus the Christ and would often read the tales of the Pharisees and think, man, it sounds like people in my ward a little bit. So, you always know things are never perfect. And I also knew, key number 2 was it's very important that I could not judge. Important not to judge. Because we're wired to do that in the church. That constant evaluation of things as either right or wrong, good or bad. So that evaluation, classification, that labeling, that analyzing, that creates a lot of turbulence within your internal dialogue and will prevent you from finding truth. So very important not to judge. And that will cut you off from the spirit of peace. You're trying to find that spirit of peace. So I knew I had to judge. I couldn't judge. Had to have an open mind. I wanted to study it out, seek truth, and let that take us where it would take us. And maybe we would find it in strange and unexpected places. Because I always believed, because I had personal experience with God in Mormonism, so I knew truth was out there, despite some of these new things that forced you to kind of reevaluate. So I read it all, right? I read it all. I read everything from In Sacred Loneliness to the Mormon Hierarchy, Origins of Power. I read Rough Stone Rolling. I read David O. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism. Read Woman in Authority, the Reemerging Mormon Feminism. Read the Joseph Smith papers. Read current conference talks and the articles by the Maxwell Institute and Fair, and searched everything looking for consistency and coherence in the narrative. And I was reminded, of course, that we teach our children to follow the prophet and teach our adults the same in ensign issues and conference talks. And certainly know, on the other hand, though, that prophets and apostles sometimes use dramatic and use emphatically strong and eternally certain language over the pulpit and general conference, things that we now find objectionable or laughable. Ranging from Adam being the only God we have to do with, the famed Adam God doctrine, to intermarrying being a sin that would separate you from the presence of God. So I knew that prophets and apostles don't always speak for God. They don't always. And I was thankful to read Elder Christofferson's talk where he said, not everything spoken by a church leader is indeed church doctrine, but rather is a personal, though well-considered opinion. So we got into it all. We confronted conflicting accounts of foundational events of the church, reviewed significant enhancements to the Book of Commandments when it was later published as the Doctrine and Covenants, and confronted things like the writings of William Clayton, that dutiful scribe to Joseph Smith on whose writings we so much depend for so much of our history. The same guy who wrote the beautiful hymn, Come, Come Ye Saints, where he documents that the Abrahamic test for Emma, whose retraction is now canonized in D&C 13251. So through it all, obviously having an open mind, yeah, sure, my jaw hit the floor a number of times. I couldn't believe what I was reading and had no answer for my dear wife who was navigating the dark night of the soul. And so I was shocked at several turns, from everything ranging from statements from church leaders in the mid to late 20th century on topics such as the ERA and why the church would fund and send busloads of women to oppose that, to the very formal and doctrine expounding language on blacks in the priesthood in very formal venues, which obviously now we look back on with somewhat of embarrassment. Which is similar language that they use now today with the gay community. So many of things forced us to find a middle way, if such a thing exists. And so through it all, we discussed it with as a partnership, talking about the angles, talking till 2 and 3 in the morning when I was traveling on the road. And everything was in question. How does all this stuff kind of fit into the grand mosaic, which is the universe of truth? So another key that I pass on to you, a third key besides having an open mind and not judging, is not to be rigid. After all, hard and rigid, it breaks and it's brittle. And many spiritual traditions teach that the hard and rigid is indeed overcome by the soft. That was taught by Jesus Christ and Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching and any other number of sources. And I knew there was truth in Mormonism. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean that Mormonism is purely true the way we tend to talk about it. It's okay to admit imperfections as the fact that even institutions can fall short of the glory of God, just like people can. So as you navigate this, if that's what you're doing, or maybe someone you love is, remember that even institutions will fall short of the glory of God. And the church certainly has truthiness, right? Credit to Brother Colbert. But doesn't mean it has to be true in the sense that many members use it, that it's infallible, perfect, and perfectly consistent from the time of Adam until now. But there is spirituality in the world, and there is such a thing as truth. Truth for you according to your tongue, and truth for me according to my tongue and my manner of interacting with the divine, because we're all tapping into that same spirit of the universe, right? We're all tapping into that same spirit that even defined, shaped, and influenced Mormonism, the Mormonism that many of us still love and cherish today. So we began seeking this middle ground together, and this way to connect with God while at the same time honoring and respecting our spiritual heritage and spiritual language, because as I mentioned, this is who we were. We were pioneer bred stock. I mean, leaving was not an option, maybe redefining perhaps. So we wanted to place all of these things, including those troubling, problematic, or contradictory things, into their appropriate context, which is perhaps put them in the bucket of personal, though well-considered opinion, or perhaps not so well-considered opinion. So it's important to do that. And we also learned that the only path to truth, to enlightenment, and to spirituality is to accept and relish the fact that we are all indeed cafeteria Mormons, cafeteria humans, learning here line upon line and precept upon precept, here a little and there a little. So we have to let go of the rigidness. And we knew that what one wise sage said is true, and I quote, "The only way to get anything in the physical universe is by letting go. Let it go, and it'll be yours forever." He went on to say that holding onto anything is like holding your breath. You will suffocate. So let it go, and it'll be yours forever. So we wanted to stay and retain who we were, what our identity was. But we wanted to, but we knew it had to be different. So what does this make us, right? What does this make me? Uncorrelated, new order, what does this make us? Nuanced. The beautiful truth of life is that really there is no middle way. Everybody is nuanced, and everybody is uncorrelated in some degree on some issues, whether they happen to be obscure doctrinal questions or even big temple recommend threatening questions. There's just your way. Chelsea and I wrestled with these ideas, as I mentioned, discussed them into the wee hours of the morning. And we've concluded that you can't be just in or out. You just need to be. You just need to be who you are. So we decided to find truth with the tools that work, and sometimes those tools involve Mormonism indeed. And we still attend faithfully every Sunday. And I still retain a faith that powers me to this day. And sometimes it doesn't involve tools found in Mormonism. Sometimes they're from other traditions. And that's okay too. Robert Frost's beautiful, but almost now virtually cliche poem rings true. When two roads do diverge into wood, you should take that load less traveled by. It will indeed make all the difference. So what does that make us? What does that make me? Well, I'm Michael Fife, and I'm a business owner, and I'm a runner, and I'm a father, and I'm a Mormon still. Thank you.
I've heard that when you are nervous, you're in their underwear. And I don't know what kind of weirdo gets off on seeing people in their underwear, especially if it's the Mormon kind. However, I am really nervous, so I'm going to imagine you as the type of people I am most comfortable with, and those are my high school students. So now all of you have really bad hair and acne. And if you're sitting next to someone who you find yourself physically attracted to, please scoot away from that person and pretend that you hate them. A few weeks ago, my students and I read a short story by Percival Everett called The Fix. In the story, a man named Sherman Olney can fix anything. He starts out with broken refrigerators and faucets, but eventually he is faced with bigger problems, marriage problems, tax problems, and one night he solves the ultimate problem. He raises someone from the dead. Sheesh, I'm getting emotional already. The end of the story finds Sherman standing on the Golden Gate Bridge, preparing to jump. He feels overwhelmed by the demands from everyone to fix their problems. A crowd stands below, begging him not to jump, screaming, "Fix us, fix us." Like the people in the story, I've spent a long time wanting to be fixed. When I was an angsty teenager who loved poetry, I loved the John Donne poem where the speaker begs God to batter my heart into submission and faith. Even as a teen, I felt like a bad Mormon. I balked at seemingly nonsensical rules about earrings and dress length. Since when did God care about earrings and knees? In young women's, the talk of finding a man to preside over my family made me shudder. I found the rhetoric on homosexuality disturbing. It didn't help that my parents raised me as an ardent Democrat, alienating me from my peers. If I had $1 for every time a classmate told me that Democrats like killing babies, well, I'd be really rich. And since I used to be a full tithe payer, the church would be too. We could have built that mall a long time ago. Despite feeling different from my peers, I found myself mimicking them in most religious settings. Like my peers, I'd offer tearful testimonies around the youth conference campfire, promising that I knew the church was true, I loved my parents, and I believed President Hinckley was a prophet. I could never admit it even to myself, but I think I hoped that if I said it enough, I'd believe it. Fake it till you make it was my subconscious spiritual mantra. Sometimes I would fantasize about a cataclysmic event that would give me an instant testimony. Nothing painful or maiming, just a pissed off angel calling me to repentance, or a near-death experience that would solidify my faith. I was really jealous of Alma the Younger. All he had to do was sleep for 3 days, and suddenly his faith crisis is over. So I would pray for my Heavenly Father to help me believe better. Send an angel, make this easier, fix me, fix me. It wasn't the first or the last time God didn't answer my prayer. For the record, I'm still waiting for him to cure my ADD, fix my really short temper, and fix my really huge and ugly feet. None of those have happened yet. As an adult, I sought a new path. My journey out of traditional Mormonhood started when I took out my endowments in the LDS temple, a few weeks before marrying my husband. When I promised to hearken unto my husband as he hearkened unto God, my heart broke inside. After all the weeks I spent repeating young woman values as a teenager, confidently believing in my own divine nature and individual worth, it all came down to listening to somebody else for eternity. And I love my husband, but I'm not one to hearken. Suddenly, it would take a lot more than an angel or a 3-day nap to make me believe enough to accept my temple covenants as doctrine. But it wasn't until Conference 2010 with the fateful Elder Packer talk that I was finally ready to leave my perfect Mormon path. Up until then, I had followed the Mormon blueprint perfectly: a baptism, young women's medallions, seminary graduation, followed by a temple marriage to a returned missionary. Despite feeling broken, I was willing to try, willing to shelf my unease about the temple and patriarchy if it meant that God would fix me and make me a perfect Mormon. But Packer's talk signified all that was wrong with my faith. I was doing mental gymnastics to make myself believe. And apparently, I wasn't the only one. When Packer asked, why would Heavenly Father do that to someone, he was asking why God would make someone gay. We disagreed on the message, but ironically, Packer and I were asking the same question. Why would our Heavenly Father do that to anyone? Why would Heavenly Father make it so hard for me to be Mormon? Why would he deny me access to a Heavenly Mother? If I was his child, why did I need a husband to hear him? Why would Heavenly Father do that to anyone? Like the people in the Percival Everett story, I was once again broken and confused, begging anyone to fix me. So, I decided if I couldn't be a perfect Mormon, I'd be an awesome apostate. I broke my spouse's heart when I told him he wouldn't have the perfect Mormon family he signed up for. I wrote really angry blog posts criticizing the church. I stopped praying, and I would mentally berate myself when I would slip up and ask for help from God. Stop it, I think. You don't believe that anymore. But it wasn't enough that I didn't believe. Week after week, I tried to convince my true believing husband to see the error of his ways and enter the world of shopping on Sunday and R-rated movies, both of which are awesome. Sorry, my dad's in the audience. Sorry, Dad. Despite my anger and bravado, I was scared. I needed someone to help me be this new person. If I could convince my husband to leave, it would validate my choice. It would fix me. I wanted my spouse to help me stop believing, help me apostatize better, make this easier. Once again, I was asking someone to fix me. However, Dan had other plans that did not include leaving the church. He did, however, want to fix me, but not in the way I wanted. He didn't understand why I couldn't look past the things that bothered me about the church. There's a tendency in the church to attribute disaffection with a simple offense. That's why Band-Aid statements like, the church is perfect, but the people are not, exist. Dan thought it was silly that I would leave the church based on something an old man said in general conference. Like many who are perplexed when an active member decides to leave, he thought I was simply offended. At the time, he didn't realize the root of my disaffection stemmed from core doctrines of the church. I felt the negative impact of patriarchy and inequity in my life. For me, the feelings of powerlessness and worthlessness I felt in the temple and during Elder Packer's conference talk wasn't an issue of an imperfect people, but a deeply flawed church. The more that I distanced myself from the church, the more active Dan became. He was not just an active member, he was a super member. He served in the elders' quorum, he went on campouts in the middle of winter with the scouts, and if there was an old lady who needed help cleaning up her yard, he was there. There was no talking him out of the church, even when I replaced my believer underwear with a much more aesthetically pleasing option. That is a really strong testimony. And I just made a joke about my underwear in front of my dad. Sorry, Dad. His testimony was much stronger than the faked testimonies of my teenage years, but the different directions of our lives made me wonder if our marriage had a chance. When discussing potential subjects for this talk with a friend, it was suggested that I talk about the humorous aspects of living in an apostate believer marriage. Maybe I will find this hilarious in a few years, but right now I just don't see the humor yet. But I do see hope. At some point in our never-ending battles on religion, I realized something very important. I didn't marry Dan because he was Mormon. He didn't marry me because I was a Mormon. We married each other after a long road trip where we didn't kill each other. We liked talking to each other. We had always been opposites in many ways. He liked Star Trek, playing Ultimate Frisbee, and voting for Republicans. I liked crappy reality TV, poetry, and voting for awesome people. If I could love a Trekkie, couldn't I love a true believing Mormon? If he could listen to my bachelorette recaps, could he love a questioning non-believer? Partially out of exhaustion from fighting and mostly out of devotion, Dan and I decided to really listen to each other. We stopped trying to convince the other to change. I learned some important things when I stopped trying to apostatize my husband. I learned that his faith went deeper than callings, outings, and service projects. He believes. He believes with his whole heart, and it is an integral part of who he is. His belief has made him a kind person. He is a great example of someone who tries his very hardest to live the gospel of Jesus Christ. He loves his neighbor and forgives trespasses against him. Dan wouldn't be the same person if he wasn't Mormon. Dan didn't need to leave the church to live an authentic life. He was already living authentically. But I was not. I was not being authentic when I was half-heartedly repeating the testimonies of my peers. But I was also not authentic when I forced myself to stop praying and refused to let myself realize that there are some parts of my Mormon heritage I want to keep. I'm going to wipe my eyes on my sweater, and you guys are going to be okay with it. Sorry. And I'm going to blame hormones, but this is just me. Okay. I remember the first time I prayed to my Heavenly Mother. I was driving to work. I found out I was pregnant, and I didn't know what to do. My prayer was uncertain. I didn't have any rehearsed lines to fall back on, but I knew I wanted to try. When I prayed and felt immediately comforted, I wasn't sure if it was because a divine presence was answering my prayer, or if I felt peace because I was finally allowing myself to live the spiritual life I wanted. Maybe it was both. There are many things I no longer agree or believe in regards to Mormonism. Likewise, there are many things I no longer believe about myself. I no longer believe I need to be fixed. It is a difficult path, the one between believer and non-believer. I am constantly reevaluating the world I live in to make room for the faith traditions of my past and the faith journey of my present. True believers and non-believers may question my devotion to either cause, but living an authentic life allows me to be a better person, a better spouse, and a better parent. Dan and I have found some common ground. I still don't like Star Trek, and he still hates reality TV, but we both want a better world for our daughter. We both want the church to be a better place. Dan now understands the pain and negative consequences of some church doctrine. He has seen and watched me live with consequences of decisions I didn't make, and he wants more for our kid. I have seen the good the church does in helping my husband live the gospel he believes. I want my daughter to love others like he does. Last Sunday, we both blessed our daughter. I prayed that my daughter would learn empathy and compassion for others, traits I see in her dad every day. Dan prayed that our daughter would have wisdom and a discerning mind, traits he's learning to see in me as I question and reevaluate my faith. Neither of us prayed for our daughter to be fixed. Like me and like Dan, she was never broken to begin with. If there is a heavenly family who loves us, I say this in their name. I also say this in the name of my new authentic family. In the name of Stephanie, Dan, and Clara Alice Lauritzen, amen.
Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day